Welcome to the PA Perspective podcast. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and I'm so excited to begin this journey podcasting throughout the medical profession.
Today, joined with me, I have Uhud. She is a current PA in orthopedic surgery, been practicing for about 16 years, which is amazing, is a grad from Mac, and created the OrthoPA, which is an amazing networking opportunity for multiple professionals within the community, and also is an educator here at Mac, which is also how we met. So I guess I'll just pass this on to you, maybe just give a short kind of introduction, and then we'll kind of dive into the points we want to talk about today.
Thanks very much for having me on your podcast, Mackenzie. I'll start with a bit of a personal background because I think it'll tie into some of the themes we talk about later on. By origin, I'm Palestinian Egyptian, so my father's side of the family is from Palestine and my mother's side is from Egypt. And I spent my childhood years up until age 9 in the Gulf. So I grew up in Qatar, and there is where I got most of my educational grounding. My parents, especially my mother, was a big advocate for us pursuing our education and being disciplined about our academics, and I think that gave me a good background into education and helped me further along in my career. And exactly 30 years ago now, my parents relocated us to Turtle Island, Canada. So I've been a Hamiltonian for 30 years. I did all my education here, elementary, middle, and high school, and did my undergrad here at McMaster in Health Sciences. And then the PA program, I was part of the first cohort in 2010, graduating here from McMaster. And just a bit of anecdote here. Sometimes people will ask me, oh, well, your English is great. Where did you learn English? And I'll jokingly say, up the hill at Westwood Elementary. And sometimes that's not the answer they were looking for. But just to give you a sense of how ingrained I've become in the culture here, but also always try to look at things from a critical lens because of my background and being a racialized woman in the healthcare space. And that does change my perspectives on things.
100%. And I love that. That's so funny up the mountain. I feel like if you're not from Hamilton, you might be confused.
Yeah. We have a mountain and downtown, which are very clearly two geographic areas of this city, which I love both spaces. Hamilton is a place I like to explore, and as much as we like to criticize Hamilton, I find myself wanting to stay here and wanting to contribute here and have a meaningful impact on the community.
Oh, I love to hear that, especially I'm not from Hamilton. Mm-hmm. I've only been here for not even a year. And I feel like I always was told coming here, you come Mac's known for obviously any of their health science and medical programs, and then you leave. So I had that ideation kind of coming in, but it's 100% growing on me, especially our healthcare here. We have so many hospitals. There's so much opportunity and growth when it comes to actually going into the field and practicing as a PA. So I love to hear that. And you're still practicing here, correct?
I am. Our practice is actually in Burlington. Okay. I started out in Hamilton, but the practice relocated there. But I do a lot of my educational contributions here in Hamilton. A lot of our networking for OrthoPA Network is local as well.
Okay, good. Love to hear that. So I guess since you were part of that first class, do you mind sharing how did you pick the PA education, or how did PA pick you, vice versa?
Very good question. I was in my second year of the health sciences program at Mac, and that tends to have a culture of being med school oriented. As much as we try to diversify it, it's still a big part and parcel of what folks like to do after pursuing that program. And in second year, a lot of my classmates were signing up to write their MCATs, and that was just the natural progression. And I remember registering to write my MCAT and actually paying the fee. And then that summer, I sat down and reflected with myself, is this truly the path I want to pursue? And I was going through some personal stressors at the time that made me think twice about dedicating myself to a pathway in, traditional medical school trajectory, which would involve financial commitment, time commitment. Oftentimes you'd have to relocate from home for prolonged periods. And at that time, I needed to be close by my family, and I made the decision to pursue something local. And I actually withdrew my application for the MCAT before starting and started thinking, well, what else is there out there? I knew I wanted to do something in healthcare. I started looking at physiotherapy, occupational therapy, thought maybe the academic route, do a master's in public health. And on one of the forums for the health sciences program, someone posted this ad about, all new program coming to Mac. It was the first year being set up, the PA profession. and remember thinking, what is the PA profession? And so you go naturally down the pathway of researching and looking it up and realizing most of the literature and information was American-based at the time, but it clicked, it resonated like it does for a lot of people, where you think, wow, I can be in healthcare, I could be directly involved in patient care. The pathway to get to it is a bit, for me in those circumstances, more manageable. The financial commitment is more manageable. And I applied, I put in the application, and haven't looked back since. The interviews for that year were quite small, and they had to make an admission decision within like a couple months. It was all very fast-paced. We were essentially entering into a field that didn't exist in the job market. It was a bit of a risk, but it felt like the right risk to take. And since completing that program, I've been in orthopedic surgery. At the time, there were no jobs, so you'd go on Google and job search, and there were nothing. You'd get no returns. So I did a rotation with an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Ivan Wong, who's a fond mentor of mine. And I fell in love with ortho. I enjoyed the variety. He ended up hiring me. I stayed with that same practice, and now my role involves the operating room, the fracture clinic, outpatient clinics, and it's a good variety and diversity in the orthopedic specialty. And I've never felt a need to leave ortho, and it's where I see myself retiring.
Wow. Oh, I love hearing all that. You brought up so many good points. I think I love your answer when it comes to picking the PA route. I feel like maybe we're all biased because we are in this, but I feel like it was always growing up, like if you want to go into medicine, you choose nursing or you choose med school. Like those were kind of the two things. Like I remember my guidance counselor in grade 10 saying something like that. And then it was like, I couldn't imagine being in your position where that profession wasn't even well like established when it come to like the advertising of the education. So like being so vulnerable and stepping into part of that education, not even knowing what jobs are out there, not even understanding like the role clarity, because especially even now, role clarity is still up in the air, especially
it's evolving.
Like especially when it comes to even just the general public. Like we are still advocating, and we'll always advocate. I think that's also probably a reason why I chose this route as well. But I love that you brought that up, because I think it was so important that understanding that we chose this for our own personal goals. Because I think some people have that ideation of like, well, why didn't you go to med school? But it's like, that's not what my goal was. That's not what my path looked like. I chose this for so many reasons. And I commemorate everyone being able to really do some self-reflection and figure out in medicine what you truly want to do. There's so many different allied healthcare professionals out there, and still people don't always know about them because like it's not well talked about. Like, for example, my sister's an OT. I had no clue what an OT was because I was never exposed to that growing up, but I always knew I wanted to go into medicine. So I love the fact that being in that first class, you guys were able to just like take a leap. And I guess I want to ask, like, what did job security really look like? Like post-grad, like what did that look like?
It was a scary time. You were investing this tuition and time into a career that wasn't established yet. We weren't regulated. There were a couple of pilot projects here and there in the province that you heard about, but no established. You couldn't shadow a PA, for example. A lot of our educators weren't PAs at the time. They were mostly MDs, some nurses. And then as the curriculum was evolving, the program started bringing in some PAs from the States to teach us. So you didn't have that model of seeing it in practice. You were very much a pioneer, which has its pros and cons. I think the pros were that you were entering into an open field where you could really shape the profession. So I knew that we especially the first few classes, carried a big responsibility of establishing what the profession is going to look like, how it's going to grow, where the opportunities are going to come from. And I knew my first job was to be the best PA student I could be, like make an impression on my mentors and the potential hiring staff, which often is the physicians, learn as many of the skills as I could, be involved, get in there, be hands-on. And I think when the physicians see that, or the hiring managers see that, and they start to realize, oh, this is a skilled professional who can fill in, access deficiencies in our facility, that's where you start opening up career opportunities. And then the first PA gets hired, and they make way for the second PA, and before you know it, you have a group of PAs at that facility, and it's a model that works well and works efficiently.
Do you work alongside other PAs right now?
At our hospital, we have one other PA affiliated with the orthopedic team, and they're trying to bring on more PAs. It's a smaller community hospital that I'm a part of, but at the academic hospitals, some of the PA teams have grown to 16 to 20 in some departments, in emergency medicine or in primary care, especially hospitalists, surgical specialties. Really, the opportunities for PAs are endless. And we often say where you can find a physician, you can also find a PA.
Oh, I love that. And I think, honestly, being a class, we're a class of 2027. We have a cohort of about 53 right now. So it is such an amazing reflection to, thank those beginning classes and all the work they did. Because, again, you were in, like, that forefront of having to, like really project what a PA is and really going in there. And, like, I think I was talking to another PA and, like, it almost kind of, like, flipped right now. Like, the hunt of a PA job has really flipped. Mm-hmm. You were out there, like, explaining what you are and why you need me and all that now. And now it's kind of flipped. Like, now that role's there, and we're still always fighting for it, but I love to, like, reflect on that. How big was your cohort size?
I think we were tiny. We might have been like 21 or 22 students. Yeah. I think it was 21. It was such an intimate learning environment. We all came from different professional backgrounds. We were all figuring it out together. It was really exciting to be a part of that. Yeah. It really was. I enjoyed PA school. I think it went by very quickly. And often people will use the description of it being like drinking out of a fire hose because of the amount of information coming at you all at once. But what I would say for students and for people just entering the field is work on frameworks and work on solidifying your understanding, and you'll fill in the details later. So when I graduated into orthopedic surgery, I wouldn't say that I was very knowledgeable in every area of ortho, but on-the-job training, hands-on training, continuing medical education has enabled me to now feel quite comfortable in most orthopedic environments where I can walk in before the physician and do a comprehensive assessment and look at the imaging and diagnose and think about the treatment plan and have all that ready to go to truly improve the efficiency. So don't be overwhelmed. It's a lot of information coming at you, but it will all integrate nicely once you enter second year and into practice as well.
I think that's so helpful hearing. Being a first-year PA right now, we're a third the way through the didactic year, which is insane. So in August, we'll start clerkship. And I think that's like that feeling of, for anyone listening, if you don't know our clerkship rotations, you get rotated through pretty much like all the main core parts of medicine. So like emergency, pediatric, geri, psych, the list goes on. So it's like we're trained as like a generalist. So you have all this information coming at you. And it's like almost that little fear of like one stepping in, like you are never going to know everything, especially right in the beginning. So hearing that, it feels like very comforting that it will all come together at one point.
It will.
And just like let that happen.
Absolutely.
Because there is a lot. There is definitely a lot. Okay, so just to transition a little bit. So I really want to talk about your involvement in the profession. So again, you were part of that first class. You pretty much were advocating from day dot. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of walk me through like the steps of advocacy, how you got to it, and then bridge that into like ortho PA right now?
The first task was securing employment. I think once you've secured your employment and you've started your clinical route and started to get comfortable, which usually happens for people around 3 or 4 years of practice, I think you start to feel confident that you could walk into any environment and be a good PA. And you're not going to know everything, but you have a good solid foundation. And at that point, you'll often start thinking, okay, what now? What next? And I got into education fairly quickly. I was actually invited by the previous dean of the program to teach MSK or musculoskeletal skills. And I was 1 or 2 years into practice when that happened. And it was a lot of me reviewing the curriculum, making sure I'm prepared and coming to the classroom ready to engage with the students and give them the clinical pearls and allow them time to practice. And I did that for about 10 years. I was immersed in the clinical skills program. And about 6 years ago, I was invited by the current dean of the program, Dr. Burrows, to think about drafting or creating curriculum around racism in medicine. Programs were starting to realize that there were educational gaps on this topic, that it wasn't taught formally, it wasn't introduced in any formal capacity. And I had shown some interest and a bit of prior experience in this work and was invited to contribute materially and to start teaching some of this material. And at the time, I started looking into what avenues there were to teach and what structures were used and what frameworks were used. And I settled on the framework of structural competency, which to me captured well the experiences of racialized patients and healthcare workers in this nation. and also got me thinking about some of the structural issues around Indigenous health and around some of the barriers, the challenges, and the injustices that the Indigenous community here has faced, and my role in propagating that, or my role in being a force towards justice in that. And so the curriculum came to life. I started teaching that as part of Pro-Comp at the PA program about, I think it's 5 or 6 years ago now. And ever since, people have shown a lot of interest, and I've been invited to teach for health policy classes here at McMaster in the undergrad program. The PA program at Saskatchewan has also had me out for a session. And I think probably part of the reason I'm here today is because of that work. And in the invitation, you had mentioned that there's an appetite to talk about these issues because they're affecting a large cohort of our students and our healthcare community. And while doing that simultaneously, I wanted to also remain grounded in orthopedics. And I thought we need a dedicated space for orthopedic PAs. There doesn't exist a space just for orthopedic PAs to learn, to network, to socialize, to talk about the challenges that face PAs. So there were conferences and educational sessions that were often geared towards surgeons or physicians, and they were great. Like, you'd attend as a PA and get a lot out of them, but it never felt like it was your own space. It never felt like it was PA-led, that it was specific to our challenges. And one day I remember sitting there and being like, Ohud, if you don't do this, who's going to do it? Like, it's got to be you. You were the first one of the first orthopedic PAs in the country, the first PA graduate cohort at MAC. You understand the PA landscape well. You understand orthopedic challenges well. You need to take this on. And it was scary. It was scary. Like, I'm not trained to be a community activist. None of us are really trained to be advocates or politicians or public health workers, unless, that was your specific training. But I did some coursework. I did a certificate in public communications and strategic communications at Western. I also completed my master's while doing my PA work. So as a clinician, I was able to obtain my master's through a degree advancement program at Nebraska. And so started building the blocks to allow me to do this. And one day I said, you just have to launch. And I talked to a friend of mine who's a business lawyer and said, walk me through this. What do I need to do to make this vision come to life? And she was excellent. She talked to me about the different vehicles of incorporation and how to get an organization up on its feet and how to set up the structures. And 3 years into it, we're over 350 members now, and that includes orthopedic PAs, sports medicine, primary care PAs, and anyone who's interested in musculoskeletal medicine. It also includes a network of supporters and people who believe in PAs, including orthopedic surgeons, industry partners and representatives, allied health, nursing, research. So it's really grown into this community that I feel very proud of, that has been a vehicle for advocacy, for connection, and for community.
Wow, I'm speechless. You are like, the way you talk about everything when it comes to the profession and all your work you've done, honestly, so inspiring. Like, I feel like I've had a lot of talks from like students and stuff, and you are my first practicing PA to have on the podcast, so I really appreciate that. But I love your standpoint of being able to balance so many things. Like, not only were you practicing and still figuring out the beginning of the PA profession, to continuing your education and then now providing more education. Like, to be able to balance that all is amazing. And it shows through, I was going to say, how we met was actually through, I received a lecture from Ohud, which was amazing. It was about racism in medicine. And I think my whole cohort walked away from there all being like, that was an amazing lecture. I think the reason why I wanted to have these conversations is because sometimes some lectures, it does just feel like you're being talked at, and it can come off just so much information. I don't know how much I can retain, but from the lecture you gave, it was a conversation. You were talking with us. You weren't talking at us. It was such a welcoming environment for a topic that I agree, like, lacks education. Even in like my undergrad studies, things that have potentially nothing to do with medicine, I feel like I never was exposed to some of those concepts, some of that vocabulary. And it is scary then stepping into medicine, maybe not having any of that education, maybe not understanding what it is. And I agree, the talk you gave, it was amazing. And that's why I wanted to have you on here for multiple reasons, but agreeing between you being able to continue your education and coming up with OrthoPA, it's so inspiring to show someone who's not only continuing their profession, but going beyond that. And again, all of those avenues, it's amazing. Like, you are doing so much for the profession. And I agree, like a pioneer, not only within orthos, but within the PA profession as a whole. So on behalf of my class and just myself, seriously, thank you so much. It's honestly so inspiring. And it's what helps me do something like this. And what's helped me do a project like this.
I just wanted to thank you for that feedback and to say that I take feedback very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Every year, I meticulously read every single comment that students write in their feedback, whether positive or negative, and I think about how can I adapt the material further? How can I make sure it's touching more people? And how can I make sure it's grounded in what the evidence and the data is showing? That's important to me too. So I do take the feedback seriously, and I invite people to give that feedback, whether in formal settings or informally. You can find me. I'm pretty accessible online. You can email me. You can check out the orthopa.ca for how to connect with us about opportunities or about feedback that you have for us. So I'm always receptive to what the community wants more of, and I try to fill in the gaps. And I always think, what didn't I have while I was a student that I would have liked to have, and try and offer that.
100%. Exactly why I started this same idea is like, even like we had a project for ProComp not too long ago, and it was to pick like topics within the PA profession, and it could be anything. And I remember we picked a topic around salary within the profession, and I'm like, let me look up a podcast or let me look up something, and there wasn't really anything. And I think that's what really like ignited that I wanted to start this, is because we need to just keep having these conversations. We need to keep talking about it. And in the end, again, that is just like how we'll continue to advance the profession. And everything you're doing is giving us so many advancements within the profession, especially within ortho in itself, which again, none of us can thank you enough, because it's actually amazing. I think I also wanted to ask you, just more from like the PA student, can you talk a little bit about your master's? I don't know if a lot of PA students kind of know about that, or like why you did it, what kind of did it give you? Because I even don't really know a lot about that, so I'd love to hear more.
So McMaster's program, as it stands, is a bachelor's level program. So you have to have, it was 2 years of undergrad. I think it's still the same, and then you could apply into it. But because of how competitive it's gotten, a lot of the time people already have a full degree, and then this is a second degree, or they might even already have a master's or be international medical graduates in some scenarios, or have a PhD. For myself, I only had my 3 years of undergrad in the Bachelor of Health Sciences program, and then I did the PA program. And I remember wanting to grow in my career. I've known that early on. I want to do education. I want to, be engaged in the community. So I looked at various master's programs, and some of my peers did masters in public health. MBAs were common. MHAs were common. And at the time, there was a career advancement options through Nebraska that you could do fully remotely while maintaining your clinical work. And that was accessible to me, and I wanted to do that. And part of my thesis was around some of the clinical work I was doing. My topic I looked into was, how do PAs and residents interact on an orthopedic practice? Because at that time, there were a lot of questions like, well, will PAs be replacing residents? Will they be taking learning opportunities away from residents? And my literature review and systematic search actually showed the complete opposite, that in most settings, PAs were augmenting the education of residents or maintaining clinical efficiency such that the surgeons and the specialists were able to dedicate more time to teaching those surgery-specific skills to the residents. And I think one paper was called, How Do PAs and Residents Play in the Sandbox? And that kind of summarizes it, that in the sandbox, there's room for all of us. There's enough toys or enough, resources for all of us if we organize ourselves effectively. And so even now in my orthopedic practice, so I'm in the OR as the first assist with the surgeon, and we have fellows that are a regular part of our practice, and they get an opportunity to be hands-on learning the surgeon-specific skills while I can continue certain aspects of the case and be efficient and be practical and continue the surgical assisting portion of the case. And everybody gets to be hands-on. We're all scrubbed in. We're all right there participating. Or in a clinical environment, for example, the surgeon wouldn't have to worry about us falling behind significantly, because teaching, as much as we all love to do it, we have to be honest with ourselves that when you're going to take on a student, you have to be ready to commit some time to them, to sit down with them, to have conversations, to answer questions. And having a PA on the service actually enables and facilitates that, because the surgeon's not feeling stressed about falling behind and the day just ending 2-3 hours late, because the PA can continue seeing patients and can maintain the flow while everybody's involved in the education. And it's a good exposure for students about interprofessionalism and how we all interact on a team. So just back to your question about the master's, I did a bit of a turnaround there.
Okay.
My master's was remote through Nebraska, University of Nebraska. And I'm not sure if they're still offering that, but I'm aware of many other programs that do offer that as well as to Canadians. And there are also opportunities here locally and at the universities in Canada to pursue a master's in any area that interests you.
Yeah, I think you bring up a few good points. Yes, I'm not sure any more about exactly how it works for our incoming cohorts. I think majority of us come from a full 4-year undergrad. I actually know there's a few people who come maybe from 3, but I think you might need minimum of 3. Again, I think it's like the competitiveness now. I think my cohort, we had like, I want to say ballpark, don't quote me, like 1,500 applicants or something like that, around that range. For the 54 spots that we hold. So, yeah, I think it's definitely competitiveness. I agree. My cohort comes from a wide range of backgrounds, which is amazing. We have people in like one from like aeronautical engineering, so like aerospace engineering. People from like, we have one from music. We had one from screenwriting. Like, there's so many diversity, which I think also proves the ability of this education, and to be able to all come from such a unique background, become a PA in the end, which I just love. Okay, so just to kind of shift gears a little bit more, I think it's kind of funny to point out that in the class of 2027, we are actually the first class under regulation under the CPSO, and I couldn't imagine what it's like, again, going from that first inaugural class to now us. Do you want to touch maybe a little bit on like CPSO, kind of what that means, and then we'll get into like where we potentially see the profession going?
Yeah, so for the last 15 years, I guess, we've been advocating, all of us as PAs in Ontario, for regulation. And there are reasons for wanting to be a regulated health profession, and a lot of it is around public trust and having an established mechanism for the work that we do. And we were all very excited when the CPSO regulation happened last year, finally, after many, many years of advocacy, and at various points, the applications, coming back with different feedback and folks pushing on many different fronts. And it was a huge milestone for the profession here in Ontario. Now, in other provinces, PAs have been regulated, like in Manitoba. I think that's an excellent model of the PA profession and how it's enrolled. And Ontario has worked quite well for most PAs in the province. After regulation, in the last month or so, there have been some revisions to the documents that allow delegation of medical acts and controlled acts. And unfortunately, that has been restrictive in some environments. Not in all, but in selected environments, the new revisions to that document have affected some of the work of my peers. But I think it's important to give that feedback back to CPSO and to say, these are policy changes on paper, but they have real-life implications, and they do interfere with accessibility, and they do affect the efficiency, and in some cases have led to roles either being dissolved or terminated or changed substantially, where they diverge from what the PA model was put in place for. And PAs, we're a reasonable bunch, so we acknowledge our role limitations, but we also know what we're good at, and we know what skill set we provide. And I think right now there are efforts nationally, provincially, for folks to come together and to give that feedback to our regulator, the CPSO, and to say the PA models do need to allow for more autonomy. They do need to allow for trust and reciprocal or parallel work between physicians and PAs. As an example, in a rostered environment, there are PAs who are comfortable handling a roster of patients with presentations that they've been exposed to and can handle comfortably. And so to require redundancy, or to require that the physician is engaged or has to review in person or directly every single encounter is restrictive, and it does set us back. Now, that's not in every setting, because that document has some specifics. So as an example, it doesn't affect PAs in the emergency department, but it is something that we need to, as PAs, be able to say, this is negatively affecting us and negatively affecting our patients, and we need to work together to to ensure that the model remains efficient and serves the populations that need our care at the end of the day.
I think that's an important part for anyone listening who doesn't understand. Again, PAs were unregulated about almost a year ago to around this day. It was like April
1st, I think.
Of last year. We became regulated under the College of Physicians and Surgeons, and it just delegated exactly where we are. So we became regulated. And then, again, like you had said, in this past little month, as a student, all we kind of heard was that there was slight drawbacks within this regulation, and it pulled a little bit on the autonomy, and it was affecting certain people within the specialty they were in. And I think it did give us a little bit of anxiety when thinking about it, because of course we're going to be graduating the next 2 years. What does that mean for the profession? So I think it's definitely reassuring hearing where you're coming from and continuing that. No matter where you are within the profession, whether you're a student or you're a PA right now, the importance of continuing to give that feedback. Mm-hmm. I think that's the only way, again, we're going to continue to work towards getting that regulation exactly kind of where it needs to be. So it's good to know that we'll find a way. Like you said, we're a strong group of people, and I think we have so many voices out there that continue to come to those meetings and talk for us that I'm sure we'll come to a good position, hopefully.
It does require, I think, deliberate and intentful advocacy. So I'm not suggesting that, we brush this to the side. Mm-hmm. I do think we need to organize ourselves. We need to lobby and advocate and speak from a position of power as a profession and as a collective body, and advocate for our patients at the end of the day. So I don't think the policy is catastrophic,
right,
but I think it is detrimental. So it does need to be addressed.
Fair. That is definitely something I'm going to look more into, and I know my whole cohort was very interested in that. So even as a student, we can have a position of something, and educating ourselves more into that regulation, I think, will do good, and being able to, like you said, voice our opinions and stand our ground. That's something as a PA student I definitely need to look into. Okay, to shift it just a little bit more, to focus on a little bit of the racism in medicine talk you gave. Again, it was so inspiring. I think we all walked out of that lecture feeling a certain type of way, because I think it was the environment you set. I think I've always said, even any subject that's a little bit more sensitive, you worry about saying the wrong thing, not knowing how to participate. Like, you just kind of don't know. And I think you set such a comfortable environment to be able to break down any anxious feelings, and you just had a conversation with us, and it was so empowering. That lecture was a 3-hour lecture, so there's only so much we can talk about here. But I guess I just maybe probed the question of pretty broad, what does racism in medicine look like? What does that mean for someone who maybe isn't fully understanding what that can look like in the medical aspect?
Yeah, my journey with the topic of racism in medicine started when I started experiencing as a racialized, Muslim, visibly hijab-wearing woman in the healthcare space, experiences that didn't sit well with me. And they would just raise some questions like, is everybody treated the same way? Am I getting a different kind of treatment than everyone else? Is this anecdotal? Is it just me? And I was trying to synthesize that information. It led to me talking to other racialized health workers and being like, what are your experiences like? And seeing now, okay, there's a pattern now. This isn't just me. This is a bigger problem than me. This affects Indigenous folks. This affects Black folks in our community. There are health discrepancies and disparities that cannot be ignored. And then from that, I zoomed out even more. So what does the data say? We're trained to be evidence-based professionals. And now I started having exposure to studies and data and not just the anecdote, but coupling that anecdote with data telling us that we have a problem of racism in healthcare. And that racism is not just towards practitioners or clinicians like myself, but also towards our patients, that affects their health outcomes and in some cases affects their, mortality, morbidity. And we have to be very honest when we talk about these things. I'll give an example of a study in the University of Alberta that looked at Indigenous patients coming into an emergency medicine environment and how they were triaged compared to someone like, for example, a white patient with the exact same presentation, and how often the Indigenous folks were triaged as lower acuity, meaning they were getting a different line of service, they were getting a different urgency of the care, and oftentimes their medical concerns weren't addressed to the standard that would be expected in medicine. And that's just one small example. We can talk about how not too far, Black students, for example, weren't welcomed into medical programs in the States. And we're not going too far back. Like, some of this is recent history, and a lot of it is current history. Even just you and I sitting here, we have to ask ourselves, we do these land acknowledgements for Indigenous communities, and oftentimes they tend to be performative, because if we sit down and say, well, where are those Indigenous folks? Like, in our PA program, how many Indigenous folks are there, and why aren't they represented in healthcare? And how can we talk about Indigenous sovereignty, and where are they now? And right here in our own neighborhood, we do have a First Nations community. What are the health discrepancies there, and how did those come about? And expanding that further out to concepts like racism, to concepts like genocide, to concepts like colonialism, and how that impacts the well-being of communities. And when you start to talk about these things, people will not like it. People won't like it. Systems of power will not like it. You will be accused of being divisive. You will be, told you're too political and you need to maintain neutrality. And as a Palestinian, I know this firsthand. I know this very well, because a simple act like, wearing a pin in solidarity of Palestinian human rights has gotten multiple of my peers in trouble for something as simple as saying I'm a healthcare worker and I care about the health of Palestinians in Gaza, as an example. And many of us have faced targeting, racism, attacks for that kind of advocacy. And it happens to other communities who are racialized as well. So we need to think, how are we going to address this? How are we going to build systems that are fair? How are we going to talk honestly about the distribution of power? Who is making decisions? Like right here at this university, who holds the power? Who is making decisions on behalf of the community? And are those decisions reflective of fair practice? So the framework that I use is the structural competency framework, and that encourages us to zoom out beyond the social determinants of health. So social determinants of health are a good place to start. They teach us about the social factors, socioeconomic, demographic factors that affect personal health. But the social structures actually teach us how those social determinants came to be in the first place. So what are the policies, the laws, the structures that gave rise to these discrepancies or to these barriers? So I train my students, myself, my colleagues. I encourage, and it's a learning process to often to zoom out and to think about the structures and to think about how you can intervene as a clinician. To think, well, I have to be neutral and I just have to distance myself, actually oftentimes makes you complicit in perpetuating that violence. So you have to tell yourself, I have to take an honest stand. I have to participate where I can. And advocacy can be multi-level. It can be research. It could be educating yourself. It could be going out to a protest, which may be discouraged as a health worker, but it's actually fundamental to what we do as health workers. And these are things that are enshrined in our professional ethics. For PAs, for example, we follow a document called the EPA, which is the Entrusted Professional, I forget what the A stands for, I forget the acronym now, but it's basically the skill set of competencies that we need to embody upon graduating to be good PAs. And one of those competencies involves advocacy, involves community health, involves being a health advocate and having awareness of social and structural determinants of health. So that's the basis that I use to teach this work. And I come to it with honesty and sincerity. I come to it inviting students to participate, to share their experiences. And I also come to it armed with the data, because every time you teach this material or present it, there will be naysayers and there will be people who question you or say, this is not true. Where did you come up with this? This may be your personal experience, but it's not reflective. Or they'll try to naturalize it to other causes and say, well, we all experience harm. But if you look at the data and look at the disproportionate harm that certain communities experience, you really can't ignore it. At some point, you have to face it head on.
Yeah, wow. Again, every time you talk, there's like 3 or 4 things that keep coming in my brain. I think a few points you made that I find really important and like resonate with myself is how I reflect on it is I feel like a lot of these things were taught specifically, let's say, in the Indigenous community. Everyone always like probes it and is like, oh, that's what used to happen. Or this is like our history.
In the past.
It's always in the past. And like that right there is like the start of our problem. If you're not able to reflect in your current environment, again, like you said, this university sits on that ground. If you're not able to currently be reflexive and look at yourself and realize that that's not just history, that history is continuing and is present today, that is something that our society struggles with as a whole. And it's the reason why we continue to face racism in medicine, is because the ability or lack of ability for people to continue to like reflect on what it looks like today. I think you also brought up a few points too of like the layers of it at like a policy level, at like the systematic level of the institution itself, potentially the provider level. Like, I think there's so many like levels to it that have to be worked upon in order to like start to actually break down some of the barriers we face. But yeah, I think that's what I always think about. I think even stepping into, let's just say like a new job, it could be anything. And I'm not going to like put any name to it. So let's say it's hypothetical because you'll see what I mean. And you're told you have to finish these modules. You know, like your WMIS module, and then there's the ones that go to like harassment within the workplace and so on and so forth. I always wonder, I don't know, it could just be like a tick of myself that it's like, is that just like that facility checking the box that their employees did it? Are they actually being reflective in their own institution and putting in policies and parameters of how they themselves can protect their clients or their patients? I always find when doing those certain modules, they're so generic. And it's like, are you just clicking that box to make sure like X, Y, and Z? Because at that point, it's like, how intentional, how educational are they actually? That's something I know we've faced even within education as a whole. Some of the lectures, I agree. I feel like it just feels like that, sitting in that hall of like, are we just checking this box and making sure everyone heard? And that's exactly why I think you left such a good impact. Is it didn't just feel like you were standing up there like, oh, I was told I had to say these. I was told I had to make sure I hit A, B, C, and then you left. Like, you really spoke from like personal perspectives, being able to represent and speak on so many aspects within it. And I think that is where we can truly learn. It's not just from something that we're checking a box on. It's actually being able to hear perspectives. It's breaking down just like the stigma around this conversation. I don't know. Maybe I'm talking in a circle, but
you're raising very good points. I think to summarize how I see it, anytime you engage in an initiative, you have to ask yourself, is this performative or is this truly impactful? And sometimes the impactful stuff is the stuff that's going to get you in trouble. That's the reality. Is power doesn't like to be disrupted. And the work that we do is to disrupt the status quo with the intention of working towards fairness and justice. And those who sit in the comfort of those power structures are not going to like that, because when you're saying, I'm disrupting your comfort because I care more about justice and about equal rights and about humanity, some folks won't like it. That's the reality. And so if you're going to embark on this type of work, you have to be honest with yourself and accept that there are risks, and but that's not to make you afraid and to push you away from doing the work. It's rather to help you stay connected with support systems and to realize that this work can only be done in the collaborative. It's not just me being a hero and saving my community. It's never going to be that. It's all of us as a collective and these moving parts working together, saying we want a better society for all of us, for everybody who comes to this institution or to this hospital, or for every patient who sets foot on this facility. We want to make sure their access to care, their quality of care is the same. And that's fundamentally that love of humanity and justice that we strive towards. And that is often attacked. It's attacked in the media. You're going to be called too woke. You're going to be called, all kinds of names for doing this type of work. But you have to be able to look past that and to work with people, meet people where they are, and at some point let people figure it out too, because we all as individuals and humans have a responsibility to step up and to do this work. It doesn't just fall on the shoulders of racialized communities. It really is a collective responsibility.
I agree. And especially being someone in medicine, you have a lot. There's a difference between just giving care and then being able to also give holistic care and being able to match each patient and understand where they came from, and not just giving them that medical aspect. You know what I mean? You brought up a good point, woke culture. I love this word. I love this little phrase. What is woke culture? What does that mean in our society today?
Well, you don't need to go too far. Just open up any mainstream media outlet and you're going to hear voices, opinions, and sometimes things presented by the outlets themselves, saying that Canada's structure is changing and that, Canada isn't what it used to be. And when you actually think about what does that actually mean and why are you scared of Canada not being what it used to be? And was what it used to be actually so great? Who was it great for and who was it not great for? Have you talked to Indigenous folks in Canada on what it's like, to be displaced from your home, to be told you can only be in certain parts of your own home, to have your resources taken away from you violently, to have your language and your children being stripped of their rights to be and to exist as Indigenous folks? And I say this with the most humility because I am by no means the expert on Indigenous topics and Indigenous health, and many of my colleagues are. But I've tried my best to connect with colleagues and continue to try, even though sometimes we fall short, to truly honor Indigenous sovereignty and to make sure when we're talking about the Indigenous community and doing research, it's not from this savior lens. We're doing it under your guidance with you. You guide us in what would help your community, and we go to work. That's how it should be, which is a work in progress. But it is something very dear to my heart because, like I said, I came here as an immigrant. I was 9 years old. So I remember a time when my parents had to review the A Look at Canada book, which was a standard history book that anybody coming to Canada had to read, and they had to take a test on it and then to show that they understand Canadian culture and values. And now when I see what was said in that text about Indigenous folks, and I actually look in my own community, like the Six Nations community right here on these lands, and talk to Indigenous folks and realize there's a huge discrepancy about the history and what actually happened to Indigenous folks on these lands and what some of our textbooks and what we were taught in high school history and civics class, as an example, there is a huge discrepancy. And why is that discrepancy there? And what are we going to do to make sure the truth gets there and gets out?
Yeah. So again, another amazing perspective that you can just see you've carried through, and that it speaks wonders through the passion that you have with this education. And again, I thank you so much for being able to give that talk to us because it really opened up my eye and left a huge impact. You kind of already answered my question is how providers, how can we do better? That's a loaded question because there's so many things, but if there's a provider who's maybe struggled a little bit with this, what would you say to them in ways that they could continue to grow?
I think the number one piece of advice I have for anybody is any environment you end up in, whether it's an institution, a clinic, a university, a hospital, ask yourself, what is the power distribution like here? Meaning, who is making the decisions? Who are the decision makers? How does power play into the dynamics and the culture of this institution? What is the environment of justice like in this institution? And oftentimes you will see the realities. You will see that the people in the C-suite or the people making the decisions versus the people actually running the work on the ground can be two very different demographics and different political background, and that it's sometimes not a fair distribution or a fair representation of society. And people will say, well, so you're saying that racialized people should just get put into these positions and if they're not qualified? And no, if you actually look at a lot of the credentials of racialized people, they are very qualified. They just don't have the opportunities, or they face certain barriers that don't allow them access to those decision-making positions. Myself included, I'll be very honest. There have been spaces that have shut me out. There have been spaces that have said, you're not welcome here based on where you stand politically. And it's discouraging and disheartening, but for me, it is not the end of the road. It tells me, if I can't be in that space, I have to create my own space. And I often find that when I just begin to create that space, people want to be a part of that space because they see it's a space of fairness and justice, and it's a space of honesty, and it's also a professional space. It's a space, for example, I'll give the example of OrthoPA Network, which is something that I feel very proud of and is dear to my heart. It's a professional place where we talk orthopedic topics. We have guest lecturers and professionals who come in and talk about their area of expertise in musculoskeletal health. And at the same time, everything we do is guided by this lens of justice and making sure opportunities are fair and making sure our speakers represent who our community is and talking about issues that people don't want to talk about or shy away from and making it clear to our industry partners and to our supporters that if you want to be a part of this network, you are welcome here, but you participating or you providing any kind of monetary gain for this network will not come at the cost of us silencing ourselves or being quiet about issues that the community wants us to talk about. So at the same time, while doing all that, I know it all sounds like serious and scary and kind of might push people away. We have fun. We have fun doing it. We are a community, a close community. We get together for dinners. We socialize. We go out in the park. We volunteer together. We are human, and the human soul likes fun, and it likes happiness, and it likes to joke, and it likes to sometimes have lighthearted moments. So we can still do that. We can do both. We can do the lighthearted community while also making sure we're not neglecting our duty of addressing the serious issues as well.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you to give a little summation again on OrthoPA, and that was exactly what it was. Again, I think it's a wonderful initiative, and I agree. You've done such a great job. It's been here. I think it shows with the amount of members you have how successful it is, and it's such an amazing community to be part of. I was just going to mention one little thing, too. I think how we can do better, at least from like a student perspective or something like that, maybe someone who's not currently out there providing yet. I think all I think about is, too, in our society, it's one thing to like repost something, like repost whatever's going around right now in your support, but then it's another thing to actually do something about it. So like, are you just reposting to just show like, I'm here, but do you actually know what it is? Have you actually done the work? Have you looked into it? I liked your point about being able to do that work under the guidance of that specific community and understanding that you need to hear from that perspective to understand exactly what's being like, what they're going through or something like that. Again, I feel like especially in the society I was growing up, it was always, just repost. Like you always saw these different like bandwagons people were jumping on and like reposting to show their support. But I always wondered how many times did that person who reposted actually know what they were reposting? Do you actually understand what's going on in the world? One thing I always say, and I was taught this actually in this program, is especially when talking to your patients, the 3 things you should always keep in mind is to be kind, be curious, and be respectful. And I always think of those 3 things. I think as a future PA, that's all I can give myself is to be able to sit in that shoes, be able to sit in that room and be kind, be respectful, and be curious. And I think if you have that mindset going in, you will be able to learn so much, and then you'll be able to give back so much at the same time. And that's just my opinion on it.
I think those are excellent. Those are great.
How we can do better. But again, a lot of this is rooted in our society, and I agree. I think you have to be willing to take a little bit of a jump and be a little vulnerable, but in the end, it will go somewhere with it. And like, I truly think the risks will pay off. It's just going to take time, and it's going to take more of this. And at some point, we'll turn an eye, I think. I think we will. Okay, well, I think that's everything. Honestly, thank you so much for coming on here. Agreed. Like, I will put all of your social medias and websites in the description. The OrthoPA Network, again, it's such an amazing network, and you've done such a good job advocating for the PA profession as a whole. And thanks for being a pioneer in this profession and leading the way for someone like myself who's going to be a new graduate. But again, thank you so much. This is the PA Perspective. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and we are breaking down barriers one voice at a time. And shout out to Lions New Media Center for production.
Thank you.
Thank you so
much. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you.